All right, now let's talk about some settings that you're going to want to look at. With the .NET Framework version, now that right there, we have found to kind of been ignored by Azure. Because Azure is not applying the .NET Framework, we haven't found it to make a difference. And in that drop down now, you see .NET 6 and all that, but we haven't found that to even, it appears at least that setting is ignored. Okay. Now, on platform settings, you absolutely want to be on 64-bit. In Azure, if you start off by spinning something up on the free tier, and then you're going to scale it up to one of the standard and premium tiers, that's great. But the free tier doesn't support 64-bit. Okay. So when you scale up to premium, remember, you are going to have to come in here and intentionally change the setting to 64-bit. The V3 instances, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, they have a lot of RAM for a pretty affordable price. But the only way to allow your running web process to use that RAM is by running it at 64-bit. We have seen situations with clients where they accidentally left this at 32-bit, and then the server instances themselves are not being starved of memory. However, exceptions start happening with out of memory exception. The server instance has plenty of RAM available, but the application is just starting to act weird, and there's these out of memory exceptions that start happening. And so if you see that happening with your application, go and check this setting, because it could be that your application is just not being allowed to use the memory that's available to it. So that's important. And then on WebSockets, you absolutely need WebSockets to be turned on. Now, SignalR is the technology under the covers for Blazor server side. And let me take a step back, because we are going to bounce back and forth between Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor server side. In your code bases, it's very unlikely that you're only going to have one versus the other. It's very likely that you are going to have both based on the scenario. And this is why. Let's say you need a high degree of compatibility in a particular application. You want your application to be able to be used across absolutely any type of client, smartphone, device, whatnot. And you're not going to try to scale up super high like Microsoft.com or whatnot. You kind of have a bounded set of users. You know who your users are, very predictable load standards. And in that scenario, that's a slam dunk situation for Blazor server side. Blazor WebAssembly, it's not even worth it. Okay. Blazor server side is more productive. There's less code for you to write. You only have one running process that's on the server. You don't have to have, say, one memory space you're managing inside the user's browser and then another memory space on the server. You have one to write. You don't have to jump over web services to transfer data back and forth. And it is insanely fast, productive to develop applications like that. On top of that, you're gonna inherit phenomenal reach just out of the gate. For example, your application is going to run on absolutely every browser out there, including the ones that don't yet support WebAssembly, which there's plenty of devices out there that don't support WebAssembly. And now you may say, well, I don't care about those devices. Okay, but this scenario that we're analyzing needs the broadest reach, and we need broad compatibility. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, other devices that have a browser built into them, they actually all support WebSockets. They don't support WebAssembly. Okay. Now, even if a browser doesn't support WebSockets, or you accidentally go in here and leave WebSockets turned off, SignalR will fall back to JavaScript long polling and continue to function. It'll just be kind of a noticeable drag. In some instances, it won't feel as snappy, and it will use more CPU on the actual server because it's just constantly polling. So it will work though. All right, So I gave you one scenario where Blazor server side is a slam dunk. Again, you will have applications of both. You just have to decide where one is more appropriate. Let me give you another example where WebAssembly would be the drop dead, absolutely perfect scenario. And that is a situation where you might previously have been tempted to do a native application. And now and you have a predictable set of client devices. So broad compatibility is not a situation. And at the same time, your challenge there is network reliability. Okay. So in that case, Blazor WebAssembly is an absolutely slam dunk, because once you do that initial load, you do have to have a reliable network just to start up the Blazor WebAssembly app, download the .NET assemblies into the browser and start it up. Your code is running in the browser. Unless you actually need to call the server to ask a question, we're not actually using the network. It literally is sitting there running in the browser. The Uno platform team actually has a pretty compelling sample of a scientific calculator implemented with WebAssembly, and it's sitting there in the browser running because it's a native .NET application, and once it's loaded up in the browser, it's there, and you don't even need the network to be functioning unless you need to call out. Okay. So that right there is a slam dunk, because then you can actually do a network test in code. If you need to, if there's a button click that's going to go over to the server, maybe you need to implement a little bit of code that tests the network so that you can just give up a little message that says, your network is not connected at this time. Please try again whenever, or whatnot. So there you go. Now, let's keep on moving down here. The last setting that I want to talk about is AR Affinity. Now, whether or not you're using WebAssembly or server side will determine whether you care about this. And if you're using WebAssembly and you have web services that don't care about sticky sessions, then you don't need this setting. If you are using Blazor WebAssembly, regardless of anything else, you absolutely need this setting to be turned on. Now, if you're low volume and you're only one web server instance, this setting doesn't even make a difference to you, because all those requests are being routed to the same server in the first place. But once you start scaling up and you have 2 servers and 3 servers, and we've scaled up Blazor server side applications all the way up to 32 web server instances, and the routing of this and the AR Affinity and just the automatic nature of how this works with Azure was absolutely a dream. It was absolutely automatic. 32 web server instances, commensurate traffic, and everything worked. Now you do want to make sure, the documentation says this, you want to make sure to be using Azure SignalR service. You don't want the SignalR backplane to be hosted in your web application. You want to offload that to Azure SignalR service, but that's in the documentation too. So so you want these settings.